There's one kind of person a narcissist fears more than anyone else. It's not someone with power. It's not someone who argues well. It's a super empath, someone who once loved deeply, forgave endlessly, and gave so much of themselves that they almost disappeared. Until one day, they woke up and walked away for good. No drama, no contation, just silence, calm, focused, and unshakable. And that silence is what unravels the narcissist's entire game, because when the super empath stops reacting, stops trying to fix, stops needing to be understood, everything collapses. A narcissist doesn't fear being exposed. They fear losing control. They fear the peace they can't disturb, the stillness they can't manipulate, and the calm presence that no longer feeds their chaos. And they especially fear the person who once fueled them emotionally, now standing firm like a mountain they can't move. In today's video, you'll discover why a woke super empath is the most dangerous force to a narcissist. You'll see your own story reflected here, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find the strength within you that's been waiting to rise. Subscribe to the channel now and watch until the very end, because you deserve clarity, freedom, and peace. Everything they tried to take from you, it's time to take it back, and it starts right now. When a super empath has endured too much and finally says enough, it's not a moment of anger, it's a moment of awakening. This time, it's not like before. There are no tears, no begging, no desperate explanations. There's no hope left for understanding, no more waiting for change. It's a quiet, unwavering retreat, not because they are weak, but because they have grown through the pain. Throughout their journey with the narcissist, the super empath gave everything. They didn't just listen. They tried to heal a soul they didn't realize was empty. They gave until there was almost nothing left, because they believed in love, in redemption, and most of all, in the hope that if they loved hard enough, the other person would finally become better. But narcissists aren't seeking real love. They seek control, admiration, and emotional dominance. To them, the empath isn't a person, they're a mirror reflecting back the narcissist's inflated sense of self. They don't love your essence. They love the version of you that makes them feel powerful. And when you stop playing their game, the whole structure begins to crumble. When the super empath wakes up, they realize that kindness is not an obligation, and empathy is not a life sentence. They come to understand that love should never come at the cost of self-destruction. They begin to ask new questions. What do I need? How do I feel? Is my value being trampled? That's when the power dynamic ends. Narcissists feed on your reactions. Every time you cry, rage, plead, or even just explain, they win. Because you're still playing. You're still entangled. But when the super empath stops reacting, stops arguing, stops trying to be understood, the entire manipulation collapses. That silence is not empty. It is filled with resolve, dignity, and a return to self. The narcissist cannot comprehend that stillness because they thrive on chaos. They manipulate to pull you into an emotional storm where they can disorient you, make you doubt yourself, and keep you dependent on their approval. But when you take back your power, when you stop letting them define your worth, they lose the thing they value most: control. And this is exactly why the super empath becomes the most dangerous person to the narcissist. Not because they seek revenge, not because they are physically stronger, but because they are no longer a source of supply, no longer easy prey. They have risen, enforced boundaries, and declared, quietly but unmistakably, I no longer belong to this toxic cycle. The transformation of a super empath doesn't happen in a single moment. It is the result of hundreds of small heartbreaks, thousands of moments of silent swallowing injustice, and countless times they tolerated the unacceptable just to keep the relationship from falling apart. But what the narcissist never expected was this. Those wounds didn't break the empath. They became the fire that forged their inner strength. During their time under manipulation, the super empath gradually lost touch with themselves. They began to doubt their feelings, their intuition, even their memories. Every time they felt hurt, the narcissist would immediately reverse the roles, blaming, twisting, distorting reality, until the empath believed they were the problem. And so they apologized for things they never did. This is the narcissist's silent strategy: to make you stop trusting yourself, Because once you lose your internal compass, you start depending on them to define what's true, what's right, and ultimately what you're worth. But everything begins to shift the moment the super empath stops. They stop seeking approval. They stop trying to make things better. They realize you cannot heal someone who refuses to heal. And most importantly, kindness, when given to the wrong person, will not be appreciated. It will be exploited. The narcissist panics at this awakening. They'll try every tactic to pull the empath back in, from playing the victim to reminiscing about the good times, even launching another wave of false affection and love bombing. But now, the difference is, the empath sees the pattern. They are no longer fooled by empty promises, tearful performances, or the classic, "I'm sorry, I'm not perfect." They don't want another cycle. They want truth. And the truth is this: a relationship cannot thrive if only one person is responsible for the emotional well-being of both. Love cannot grow in an environment of control, blame, and manipulation. And no matter how warm a heart is, no one is obligated to lose themselves just to maintain a connection with someone who never truly respected them. This is when the super empath returns, not to the narcissist, but to themselves. They learn to listen to their inner voice again, to set boundaries, not out of hatred, but out of self-love. And most importantly, they are no longer afraid of being misunderstood, because now they understand that no one has the right to define your worth but you. Peace no longer depends on pleasing others. Joy no longer comes from someone else's approval, but from the harmony between your heart and your mind. Once the super empath returns to themselves, something extraordinary begins to happen. They are no longer haunted by the need to understand why the narcissist treated them that way. They stop analyzing every word, every expression, every silence, trying to find the hidden meaning. Instead, they shift their focus from the outside world back inward. They begin to ask, what do I need to heal? What have I abandoned within myself? What do I truly deserve? And step by step, they reclaim the life they once silently gave up. At this stage, the narcissist no longer recognizes the person who used to be the perfect source of supply, because now they are no longer predictable, no longer reactive, no longer explaining themselves or begging for validation. Instead, they are calm, clear, emotionally distant, with intention. And that calmness, quiet, poised, and firm, is the most devastating blow to the narcissist's power-hungry ego. Narcissists don't know how to handle peace. They need drama, they need emotional friction, they need conflict to stay at the center of the story. But when the super empath stops reacting, stops falling into emotional traps, the narcissist's entire game loses its audience. Now the empath begins to experience freedom, possibly for the first time in a very long time. They rediscover old passions. They reconnect with healthy relationships that the narcissist once isolated them from. They begin to laugh again, a real laugh, free of weight or performance. They no longer need permission to live authentically. And in that journey, they realize emotional detachment isn't cruelty. It's the deepest form of self-love. They no longer have to stay to prove they cared, no longer have to sacrifice to keep someone from leaving. They now understand love cannot survive without respect and emotional safety. To the narcissist, this version of the empath may look like a traitor. They may smear them, twist stories, launch one last dramatic attack just to create chaos. But this time, the empath doesn't respond. They no longer need to explain. They no longer feel the need to restore their image. Because inner peace matters more than external validation. That's when the true transformation takes place. The one who used to be the most vulnerable, the most forgiving, the most emotionally exposed, is now the strongest, clearest, and most grounded version of themselves. They don't need to shout to be heard, don't need to cry to be loved. They simply exist as they are, firm, whole, and unshakable. And then something else happens, something that terrifies the narcissist more than the departure itself: complete silence. No more late-night messages, no more emotional outbursts, no more "we need to talk," just a quiet exit, calm, composed, and unshakable. The super empath doesn't leave in rage. They don't slam the door with vengeance. They simply walk away without looking back. And that very moment, when there's nothing left to say, nothing left to prove, nothing left to hold on to, is what collapses the narcissist's entire structure of control. Why? Because the narcissist doesn't fear losing you. They fear losing control over you. They need your reactions to feel alive. They feed off your pain to inflate their fractured sense of self. But when you no longer react, they become invisible in your world. And from there, we enter one of the most vital stages of recovery, the emotional detox phase. This is the time when the super empath begins to peel away each invisible thread of manipulation that had quietly entangled their mind and spirit. Memories that once triggered guilt are now seen through the lens of clarity. Words that once felt crushing now reveal themselves as manipulations. Behaviors they once excused no longer look like trauma-driven mistakes, but like deliberate, repeated choices. Emotional detox is not a smooth path. It often comes with waves of grief, emptiness, and disorientation. Because throughout the relationship, the empath had learned to survive by constantly reacting to someone else. They lived in a state of doing something to keep the connection alive. Now, with no one pulling their strings, they must learn to live for themselves. And this is where rebirth begins. The super empath starts rebuilding from the roots. They learn to trust their own intuition again. They learn to say no without guilt. They learn to exist in peace without needing to earn it. They no longer seek external validation. They no longer need someone to believe them, to understand them, or to agree with their truth, because they now know real worth doesn't require explanation. And the most liberating part is this: they no longer need the narcissist to apologize. They no longer need closure. They no longer wait for a peaceful ending. Their quiet exit is the perfect ending. When the super empath no longer seeks an apology or validation from the one who caused their pain, they step into a new phase, a phase of emotional sovereignty and complete self-reconstruction. Gone are the questions: why did they do this to me? Did they ever really love me? Or what if I had done something differently? These questions once trapped them in an invisible cycle where the past dominated the present and blind hope clouded the future. Now they stop trying to make sense of the narcissist. They begin to understand that the only thing truly worth understanding is their own inner world. And with that realization, they turn inward to care for the parts of themselves that were left starving for too long: their values, their boundaries, their joy, and their identity. They start living differently, not to prove anything to the narcissist, but because they want to return to themselves, to the version of who they were before emotional manipulation distorted their worth, before they were cast in the role of the savior, the sacrificer, the one who forgives everything. The change begins in small ways. A meal they eat because they enjoy it, not because someone else approves. A conversation where they speak their truth, no longer feeling obligated to always be gentle. A silence that isn't driven by fear, but by their ability to filter what energy they allow in. Gradually, new and healthier connections begin to form, relationships built on mutual respect, where kindness isn't weaponized and empathy isn't mistaken for weakness. The super empath no longer equates love with sacrifice. They understand that healthy relationships are grounded in fairness, respect, and the freedom to be one's full self. When they come across old patterns, people who try to control, manipulate, demand, or use silence as a weapon, they no longer feel drawn in. They no longer try to heal everyone, no longer stay to understand more. They are now clear-eyed enough to walk away early before their heart gets pulled back into the same old cycle. And when that happens, something miraculous begins to unfold. The super empath, once the victim, becomes a source of inspiration for others. They share their story, not to complain, but to light the way for those still trapped in the dark. They become living proof that you can love deeply, forgive endlessly, fall hard, and still rise again stronger than ever. They know healing is not linear. There will be days when the memories return and the tears fall quietly, moments when doubt creeps in, asking if they're on the right path. But now, they no longer see these moments as weakness. They understand that this is the most beautiful part of being human, the fragile, sacred steps of healing. And every step forward, no matter how slow, is one step further from the toxic past, one step closer to freedom, authenticity, and the peace they once thought was never meant for them. But now they know they are worthy of it. After everything, there is one trait that allows the super empath not only to survive the pain, but to truly evolve through it: the ability to forgive. Not a blind or weak kind of forgiveness, not the kind that excuses behavior just to keep someone close, but a conscious, intentional act rooted in a heart full of depth and a mind sharpened by truth. When a super empath loves, they love with everything, with emotion, presence, and a vision that sees beauty even in the broken. They once believed in healing others through love, believed that if they cared enough, waited long enough, gave enough, even the most wounded soul could be softened. That's why they forgave, again and again. They forgave the harsh words, the disrespect, the blame shifting, the cold silences, not because they didn't notice, but because they chose to see hope over fear. Yet what truly sets the super empath apart is not just their ability to forgive others. It's that they learn to forgive themselves. They forgive themselves for staying too long, for trusting too deeply, for losing parts of themselves in the effort to save something that was never real. And that is what the narcissist will never understand. For them, forgiveness is a tactic, a tool for regaining control. But for the super empath, forgiveness is freedom. It's a quiet declaration. I will not let what you did define who I am. The super empath does not carry hatred into their future. They're not driven by revenge or the need to prove their strength. They live for themselves now, with the same kindness as before, but now wrapped in healthy boundaries and emotional intelligence. Their forgiveness does not come with reconnection. Not everyone they forgive gets a second place in their life. Because now, they clearly understand the difference between releasing a wound and reopening the door to the one who caused it. They know that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about lifting the weight off their own heart. So they no longer tremble at a familiar voice, no longer shrink when someone mentions the past, no longer carry shame for something they couldn't change. And so they move forward, lighter, more peaceful, still compassionate, but no longer vulnerable to being used. They begin to love life again, not by rushing to fill the void, but by getting curious about who they truly are. They can smile with someone new without abandoning caution. They can open their heart, but never drop their boundaries. Because now they know forgiveness is a gift, but not everyone deserves to receive it alongside a place in their life again. After forgiving and returning to themselves, the super empath begins doing something they once feared the most: setting boundaries. In the past, they thought boundaries were cold, that saying no was selfish, that keeping distance meant a lack of love. So they opened too wide, gave too much, endured too long, just to hold on to a connection that was never truly healthy in the first place. But now, awakened from the emotional fog, they understand one powerful truth. No real love requires you to lose yourself, and that's when they begin drawing lines, clear, steady, and without guilt. Boundaries are no longer a way to keep others out, but a declaration of self. This is who I am. This is what I allow into my life, and this is the line you don't get to cross. The super empath no longer yields unconditionally. They no longer accept apologies without change, no longer shrink when someone accuses them of being too sensitive. Because now they understand that sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's a powerful emotional radar, and they've learned to trust it. Setting boundaries is not always easy. At first, it comes with guilt. They fear being misunderstood. They fear being called cold, distant, or not themselves anymore. But eventually they realize every boundary they set is a step towards saving their own heart. And boundaries aren't just words, they are action. They are walking away from toxic environments. They are no longer trying to please everyone. They are choosing silence over endless explanation. They are refusing to engage in emotional games that once kept them trapped. Boundaries don't isolate the super empath. On the contrary, they protect their clarity, safety, and strength. They no longer measure their worth by how others perceive them, no longer seek approval to feel whole. They know exactly who belongs in their energy and who must stay outside it. And as the super empath learns to guard these boundaries, they naturally inspire others to do the same. Not by preaching, but by the quiet strength of their presence. They show the world, you can love deeply without abandoning your limits. You can be compassionate and still say no. You can be a light for others without burning yourself out to guide their way. This is not a temporary shift. It is an inner evolution from someone who lived to please others to someone who lives with clarity and alignment, from someone who once endured to keep others to someone who walks away to keep themselves. And nothing can shake a heart that has learned how to love itself without compromise. Beyond setting boundaries, the awakened super empath possesses the one power narcissists fear most, the ability to expose who they truly are. Narcissists live behind a mask. They craft the perfect facade, charming, confident, kind, vulnerable, whatever suits their goal of manipulation. For most people, that mask is convincing enough to hide the emptiness beneath. But to a super empath who has endured enough pain, gained enough clarity, and learned the patterns of emotional abuse, that mask no longer works. Because the super empath no longer sees through innocent eyes. They see through intuition. They hear between the lines. They feel the inconsistencies in tone, the emptiness behind the affection, the hollowness in every calculated touch. And they realize, beneath the polished exterior lies a fragile, terrified, emotionally dependent soul. What terrifies the narcissist isn't abandonment. It's being fully seen without having control. They can't stand the gaze of someone who sees straight through them but refuses to play along. Because once the super empath no longer reacts, argues, or tries to save them, truth begins to speak louder than any mask. And the truth doesn't need to be screamed. Sometimes it's in the stillness, in a steady gaze that makes the narcissist take a step back, in the quiet resolve that says, I see you clearly, and I choose not to participate in your performance anymore. Nothing threatens a narcissist more than undeniable truth. The super empath doesn't seek revenge or public humiliation. They don't need to smear or expose anyone in front of others. They simply stop cooperating with the illusion. And that alone strips the narcissist of what they value most: attention, emotional fuel, and control. The super empath doesn't just walk away. They walk away in the light of truth. And that light, though silent, cracks the narcissist's mask. At this point, narcissists usually respond in one of two ways. They either lash out, trying to suck the empath back into chaos one last time, or they play the victim, pretending to be sorry, wounded, and vulnerable, hoping to trigger old compassion. But the super empath has become immune. They no longer cry for a script. They no longer reach for a hand that once caused them pain. They choose truth. They choose peace. They choose to move on without needing a final scene. And that is when the narcissist truly loses. Not because they were exposed in front of the world, but because they lost all power in the silence. When the super empath emerges from the darkness, they don't just heal themselves, they begin to shine. And that light doesn't illuminate only their own path, but becomes a beacon for others still lost in the emotional maze of pain. No one understands pain like someone who has walked through it. No one listens with more compassion than a heart that has once been crushed by deception, manipulation, and betrayal. And no one inspires healing quite like a soul that once shattered, but chose to rebuild instead of retaliate. The super empath doesn't preach. They don't speak to teach or lecture. They share because they've truly lived the depth of that pain. And they know what it feels like to doubt yourself, to feel trapped in a cycle called loving the wrong person. It's their presence, calm, grounded, without judgment, that becomes a gentle reminder. You're not crazy, you're not weak, and you are not alone. And from there, healing begins to spread. They don't need a stage. They don't need poetic speeches. Simply by living in alignment with their values, setting strong boundaries, and refusing to compromise with toxicity, they become living proof that healing is real. That you can love the wrong person, trust the wrong soul, fall hard, and still rise even stronger than before. They've walked through the storm, and they're no longer afraid of the thunder. They are not just survivors, they are transformers. Their scars are no longer marks of failure. They are symbols of evolution. And the most miraculous thing, when they no longer try to save anyone, their presence alone creates a safe space for others to begin saving themselves. They begin building new relationships, not to fill a void, but to create true connection. They love with discernment, knowing how to give without losing themselves, how to listen without dissolving into someone else's story. The reborn super empath is no longer the fragile rescuer who once tried to fix others. They are the firekeeper, not for others to lean on, but as a reminder that the light is always within. You just have to reclaim it. They live with quiet strength, with gentleness that can't be manipulated, with kindness that cannot be exploited. And that is the most beautiful thing. Not because they won or proved the narcissist wrong, but because they no longer need validation from someone who once denied them. They've risen far beyond that shadow. Now they are the light, not blinding, but warm, not loud, but unmistakable. And if you're reading this, still navigating through the wreckage, remember this: that light is waiting for you too. You don't have to become someone else. You just have to come home to yourself, just like they once did. You see, a super empath is not just someone who has been deeply hurt. They are someone who chose to rise through the wreckage, who walked through the fire of betrayal and still held on to their compassion. They were once called too soft, too sensitive, too kind. But in the end, those very qualities became their greatest strength. They don't need to shout that they've won. Their victory isn't in someone else's acknowledgement, it's in their inner freedom. They're no longer controlled by someone else's chaos, no longer sacrificing their identity to hold on to a love that was never real. They've come home to themselves with a whole heart and a clearer mind than ever before. And if you're somewhere on this journey right now, lost, confused, questioning your strength, remember this: that isn't failure. It's the beginning of your rebirth. Because within you, there is a light waiting to be awakened. A part of you that still knows how to love, how to trust, and how to walk out of the dark. You don't need to rush. You only need to be patient with yourself. And when the time comes, you won't just heal. You'll inspire others. You'll become the light, just like the one you once needed in your darkest hour. If you saw yourself in this story, don't forget to hit subscribe. The next video might be exactly what you need to take the next step, with more clarity, more compassion, and the freedom you've always deserved.